For listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper. Well, I have returned from my journey to the state of Michigan, and it was interesting. And the meeting was very good, attended by a lot of people interested in the Constitution Party. And I think we're going to do great things in the coming months. At least I hope so. You see, because things have happened in our history that very few, if any of you, know anything about. And it's about time that you learned. Don't go away. Tonight is another lesson in the history that has decided your future for you and your abdication of your responsibilities to know what in the hell is going on.
When a star is born, it possesses a gift or two, and one of them is this: it has the power to make a wish come true. When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are. Anything your heart desires will come to you. If your heart is in your dream, your request is to exceed. When you wish upon a star, as
Many different events occurred, ladies and gentlemen, just prior to and during World War II. I'm going to read to you from some of the periodicals of that day, some of the most significant of these events that have been subdued things that were in the headlines emblazoned across the front pages of newspapers in those days have been hidden today. In fact, since the end of World War II, much of this has been suppressed. Very simply because Americans rejected it. They called those who brought these things about traitors. Among the most prominent was Harry S. Truman and General George Marshall and Dean Acheson, all 33rd degree Freemasons of the Scottish Rite of the Southern jurisdiction. And maybe much, much more. A poet had a vision at one time in the history of the world. His name was Tennyson. And it is fitting that I read to you the poem that he wrote depicting what would happen on the threshold of this New World Order, the United Nations of the world. The periodicals of the day said, "What a glorious vista opens before mankind. At last the poet's dream is about to be realized." Talking, of course, of Tennyson's poem, which I quote, "For I dipped into the future, far as human eye could see, saw the vision of the world and all the wonder that would be. Saw the heavens fill with commerce, argosies of magic sail, pilots of the purple twilight dropping down with costly bales. Heard the heavens fill with shouting, and there rained a ghastly dew from the nation's airy navies grappling in the central blue. Far along the worldwide whisper of the south wind rushing warm with the standards of the peoples plunging through the thunderstorm, till the war drums throbbed no longer and the battle flags were furled, and the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the world." And in the periodicals and the newspapers of that day, it was said, and I quote, "We are on the threshold of Tennyson's vision, embodying the hopes and aspirations of countless generations, the teachings and longings of prophets and sages, of mere men and madmen, of revolutionaries and evolutionaries, have prepared our generation to embrace soul force as the design for living, to build the world of tomorrow on sound principles of reconstruction, to wit, taming of the state, promotion of regionalism, crushing of chauvinism, recognition of the interdependence of nations. We are on the threshold of a new world order. It is appropriate that the beginnings of the Commonwealth of the United Nations of the world should have been made in Washington. The United Nations of the world, the UNW, is the logical culmination of the work of the Founding Fathers, of George Washington and his co-workers who established the United States of America." End quote. And another one said, "Mr. Lewis Adamic is right. Today, more than ever before, do we need a two-way passage. The United States of America, having prospered on imports from abroad of men and materials, of learnings and skills, of wisdom and experience, now must export her wisdom and experience to Europe and to the rest of the world. The federal principle, successfully worked by the American people for 150 years, must now be exported from the United States of America to the other nations of the world, to the end that there may arise on the ashes of conflicting nationalisms the United Nations of the world." This is indeed what is happening before our eyes. Only the dull-witted and the insensitive may fail to grasp the full import of the 26-nation agreement signed in Washington, D.C. on the 1st of January 1942. This agreement itself is based upon the Atlantic Charter, the joint declaration of President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill, dated August 14, 1941, inasmuch as it is an important historic document. We herewith reproduce the complete text of the communique on the Atlantic Charter. The United Nations of the world, ladies and gentlemen, were created on the 1st of January, 1942, based upon the agreement called the Atlantic Charter. From that point onward, the Allied forces in Europe and in the Pacific were called the United Nations. General Dwight David Eisenhower functioned as the first Secretary General of that United Nations. It was, of course, fitting that he went on to be President of the United States of America. We have in our possession a map that was drawn up in 1941 and published in 1942, which shows the exact partition of the world as it was actually partitioned after the war. This map was drawn up in 1941 and published in 1942. It is here at the Research Center. On the map, it shows a new nation in the area that was then known as Palestine. On this map, it is called Hebrew land. It shows the exact borders which later became the nation of Israel. Conspiracy? No. As I have revealed to you over and over again on this broadcast, it is no conspiracy. It has all been done in the open. Anyone could have purchased that map in 1942. You have been asleep for many years. It is time to wipe the sand from the corners of your eyes, to stand up and gaze down at the long beard that you've grown during your slumber, to walk down into the town and see if anybody remembers who you are. The Atlantic Charter, I quote verbatim, "The President of the United States and the Prime Minister, Mr. Churchill, representing His Majesty's government in the United Kingdom, have met at sea. They have been accompanied by officials of their two governments, including high-ranking officers of their military, naval, and air services. The whole problem of the supply of munitions of war, as provided by the Lend-Lease Act for the armed forces of the United States and for those countries actively engaged in resisting aggression, has been further examined. Lord Beaverbrook, the Minister of Supply of the British government, has joined in these conferences. He is going to proceed to Washington to discuss further details with appropriate officials of the United States government. These conferences will also cover the supply problems of the Soviet Union. The President and the Prime Minister have had several conferences. They have considered the dangers to world civilization arising from the policies of military domination by conquest, upon which the Hitlerite government of Germany and other governments associated therewith have embarked, and have made clear the steps which their countries are respectively taking for their safety in the face of these dangers. They have agreed upon the following joint declaration. The President of the United States of America and the Prime Minister, Mr. Churchill, representing His Majesty's government in the United Kingdom, being met together, deem it right to make known certain common principles in the national policies of their respective countries on which they base their hopes for a better future for the world. First, their countries seek no aggrandizement, territorial or other. Second, they desire to see no territorial changes that do not accord with the freely expressed wishes of the people concerned. Third, they respect the right of all peoples to choose the form of government under which they will live, and they wish to see sovereign rights and self-government restored to those who have been forcibly deprived of them. Fourth, they will endeavor with due respect for their existing obligations to further the enjoyment by all states, great or small, victor or vanquished, of access on equal terms to the trade and to the raw materials of the world which are needed for their economic prosperity. Fifth, They desire to bring about the fullest collaboration between all nations in the economic field with the object of securing for all improved labor standards, economic adjustment, and social security. Sixth, after the final destruction of the Nazi tyranny, they hope to see established a peace which will afford to all nations the means of dwelling in safety within their own boundaries, and which will afford assurance that all the men in all the lands may live out their lives in freedom from fear and want. Seventh, such a peace should enable all men to traverse the high seas and oceans without hindrance. Eighth, they believe that all of the nations of the world, for realistic as well as spiritual reasons, must come to the abandonment of the use of force. Since no future peace can be maintained if land, sea, or air armaments continue to be employed by nations which threaten or may threaten aggression outside of their frontiers, they believe, pending the establishment of a wider and permanent system of general security, that the disarmament of such nations is essential. They will likewise aid and encourage all other practicable measures which will lighten for peace-loving peoples the crushing burden of armaments, signed Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Winston S. Churchill, both highly degreed Freemasons. The foundation of what is happening now actually started much earlier, ladies and gentlemen, but in light of your knowledge, there is no sense in going back that far. And I'm sure you understand what you are hearing now that you didn't understand before. And there was a declaration by the United Nations of the world. The Declaration by United Nations, signed in Washington on the 1st of January 1942, is perhaps fated to be the most important document of the 20th century. The signing was spread over 2 days. President Roosevelt for the United States of America, Prime Minister Churchill for the United Kingdom, Ambassador Litvinov for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Foreign Minister Sung for the Republic of China, signed the document at the White House on the 1st of the year, 1942. Signatures on behalf of the other 22 nations at war with the Axis were affixed on the 2nd day of January alphabetically in the office of A.A. Burrell, Jr., Assistant Secretary of State. And this explains many things that you have not been able to explain heretofore. All of this will eventually be found in the pages, documented by source, page, paragraph, everything. In our newspaper, which started out to be called The Intelligence Analyst, we have changed the name to Veritas. Veritas, V-E-R-I-T-A-S. Veritas. V as in Victor, E-R-I-T-A-S. If you'd like to subscribe, ladies and gentlemen, 1 year subscription of 24 issues is $50. $50. Make checks or money orders out to Veritas and nobody else. Veritas, V-E-R-I-T-A-S. If you don't, we'll have to send them back to you because we won't be able to deposit them. Veritas, V-E-R-I-T-A-S. Send them to Post Office Box 3390. That's P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. That's Veritas, P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. If you have any questions about this, you can call us during the daytime at area code 602-337-2562. That's area code 602-337-2562. It's the only newspaper in the world for intelligent people. We'll not tell you what to believe. We will give you the facts. You can decide your own future. It'll be the only newspaper in the world that doesn't tell you what to believe or slant the articles to make you believe something that maybe isn't even true. The declaration, ladies and gentlemen, by the United Nations of the world, phrased to make it unnecessary for Russia to go to war against Japan. And this statement was made by Mr. Frank L. Klucon of the New York Times, January the 3rd, 1942. It was made public at 3 p.m. on the 2nd of January, 1942, only a few hours after announcement that Japanese forces had occupied Manila. In very truth, this declaration by United Nations is a war pact. It bars separate armistice or peace on the part of any of the signatories and commits them to complete victory over their enemies and pledges mutual cooperation, economic and military. The peace it envisages is to be founded upon the Atlantic Charter, which, according to Mr. Klucon, provides for no territorial aggrandizement, self-determination, equal access for all peoples to raw materials, improved living standards, freedom from fear and want, freedom of the seas, a system of general security, and disarmament of aggressors and potential aggressors. In other words, all nations, as we have outlined previously. The statements made at the time were, and I'm going to read some of them, I welcome this enunciation by Mr. Klucon of the general principles underlying the Atlantic Charter. How the general principles have become vitiated in concrete application in Mr. Churchill's thinking will be demonstrated. In the meantime, it is important to point out that the machinery of unified operation now being evolved under the declaration by United Nations may be, indeed ought to be, thought of as a starting point in the building of tomorrow's world order. Let us hold fast to the idea that the United Nations of the world shall be the logical extension of the United States of America, both in function and in pattern. The great importance I attach to this declaration derives, in my thinking, not from its utility as a war pact, but from its utility as an unrivaled peace instrument. That statement was by Haridas T. Muzumdar, Ph.D. Here's the text of the Declaration by the United Nations. Declaration by United Nations. A joint declaration by the United States of America, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, China, Australia, Belgium, Canada, Costa Rica, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Greece, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, India, Luxembourg, Netherlands, New Zealand, Nicaragua, Norway, Panama, Poland, South Africa, and Yugoslavia. The government's signatory hereto, having subscribed to a common program of purposes and principles embodied in the joint declaration of the President of the United States of America and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, dated August 14, 1941, known as the Atlantic Charter, being convinced that complete victory over their enemies is essential to defend life, liberty, independence, and religious freedom, and to preserve human rights and justice in their own lands, as well as in other lands, and that they are now engaged in a common struggle against savage and brutal forces seeking to subjugate the world, declare 1. Each government pledges itself to employ its full resources, military or economic, against those members of the Tripartite Pact and its adherents with which such government is at war. 2. Each government pledges itself to cooperate with the governments signatory hereto and not to make a separate armistice or peace with the enemies. The foregoing declaration may be adhered to by other nations which are, or which may be, rendering material assistance and contributions in the struggle for victory over Hitlerism. Done at Washington, January 1st, 1942. The United States of America by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland by Winston Churchill. On behalf of the government of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Maxim Litvinov, Ambassador. National Government of the Republic of China, Se-Wen Soong, Minister for Foreign Affairs. The Commonwealth of Australia by R.G. Casey. The Kingdom of Belgium by Comte R.V.D. Stratton. Canada by Leighton McCarthy. The Grand Duchy of Luxembourg by Hugues Le Gallais. The Kingdom of the Netherlands by A. Loudon. Signed on behalf of the Government of the Dominion of New Zealand by Frank Langstone. The Republic of Nicaragua by Leon de Bail. The Kingdom of Norway by W. Munt de Morgenstern. The Republic of Panama by Jan Gordia. The Republic of Poland by Jan Kirchanowski. The Republic of Costa Rica by Luis Fernandez. The Republic of Cuba by Aurelio F. Conchiso. Czechoslovak Republic by V.S. Herban. The Dominican Republic by J.M. Troncoso. The Republic of El Salvador by C.A. Alfaro. The Kingdom of Greece by Simon P. Diamanthopoulos. The Republic of Guatemala by Enrique Lopez Herate. La Republique de Haiti per Fernand Dennis. The Republic of Honduras by Julian R. Caceres. India by Girya Shankar Bajpai. The Union of South Africa by Ralph W. Close. And the Kingdom of Yugoslavia by Konstantin A. Fotish. The United Nations of the world, the UNW, represented the logical culmination on a worldwide scale of the United States of America in that day. With the declaration by United Nations was born the United Nations of the world, embracing in the beginning 26 nations from all the continents of the globe. The Atlantic Charter and the Declaration by United Nations formed the cornerstone of the world order of today. Hence, a critical appraisal of the two documents is highly desirable for the twofold purpose of highlighting the desired ends and pointing out possible pitfalls and shortcomings. This was done in that day, and we will recount the full critique to you that was made in 1942. Don't go away, ladies and gentlemen, because whether you want me to or not, tonight I'm coming right back. Everyone concerned with the treason that you are hearing about tonight, ladies and gentlemen, are 33rd degree Freemasons of the Scottish Rite of the Southern jurisdiction or of the Northern jurisdiction, or were Knights Templar, which is the highest degree of the York Rite. All, without exception. Everyone, I'm telling you now, everyone in Washington, D.C., except those who may be new to Washington, D.C., newly elected, know exactly what is happening, know exactly how it was brought about, know exactly where it is going. They are constantly performing a play on the stage for the sheeple of the world. Democrats against Republicans. Republicans against Democrats. The president against the Congress. The Congress against the president. What is it that Shakespeare said? All the world is but a play, and we are but actors upon the stage, or something to that effect. I don't have that direct quote in front of me. You see, ladies and gentlemen, unless we, the people, exert our power, there will be a world totalitarian socialist government. For all of these people that I am telling you about tonight were socialists. Some of them were communists. All of them were members of the secret societies. Now, you're going to have to get yourself some protection, because there's going to be a severe conflict between those who want a totalitarian socialist world government and those who do not. Between those who might accept a world government of another kind and those who will not. Those who want isolationism and want to maintain the status of the United States of America under its Constitution and Bill of Rights, at least until something better presents itself, against those who do not wish sovereign nation states to exist any longer. Call our sponsor, Swiss America Trading, now, right this moment. Every hour that you listen to this broadcast brings you to a closer realization of what is coming right around the bend. Nothing will stop it except educating the great masses of sheeple that exist in this country, so that the people could exert the real power of the world, for no government exists without the consent of the governed. Call 1-800-289-2646. That's 1-800-289-2646. You've been the victims of a great campaign of propaganda waged against you day and night for many, many years. Most of you have no conception anymore of the reality of the world, or even the reality of what's happening in your own city, much less the state, the nation, or the world. Call now 1-800-289-2646. Ask for the newsletter. Tell them that you are listening to the hour of the time every night with William Cooper, and you'll get VIP treatment. I guarantee it. Do it now. You need the protection, for very shortly they will pull the plug. All of the legislation for the two-tiered money system has been passed. There is only one reason for a two-tiered money system, one currency existing outside the borders of the United States of America at one value, and another currency devalued within the borders. Will not be spent outside the borders. You will have to change your currency if you leave the country. 1-800-289-2646. Do it soon, for I firmly believe that the trigger for the downfall of the economy will be the day the market reaches 4,000. A critique of the Atlantic Charter. President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill, in their joint declaration of August 14, 1941, known as the Atlantic Charter, enunciate 8 points. First, their countries seek no aggrandizement, territorial or other. The first of the 8 points, they state that their countries seek no aggrandizement, territorial or other. How much self-abnegation does Britain exhibit in renouncing all territorial and other ambitions after having extended her sway over 1/4 of the land surface of the earth, containing choice mineral wealth and other raw materials, not to mention 500 million subjects? Far from reassuring the world, this point lends credence to the belief widely held that not only is Britain intent upon maintaining her far-flung empire, but that she is also intent upon having America underwrite the status quo, at least so far as maintenance of the British Empire is concerned. In the second point, they maintain that they desire to see no territorial changes that do not accord with the freely expressed wishes of the peoples concerned. Does this mean they do want to see territorial changes that do accord with the freely expressed wishes of the people concerned? If the answer is yes, then we invite the British government to comply with the freely expressed wishes of the peoples of Palestine, India, and Burma. In the third point, the doctrine of self-determination for all nations is endorsed with a specific plea that sovereign rights and self-government be restored to those who have been forcibly deprived of them. Does this point embrace the restoration of sovereign rights of self-government to India, Burma, and other parts of the British Empire that were forcibly deprived of their sovereign rights and self-government by the British government 5 generations ago, as in the case of India, just a generation ago, as in the case of Palestine and other post-war acquisitions of the British Empire? Mr. Churchill's amplification of the Atlantic Charter, this third of the 8 points, makes grand reading, but lurking behind it is the specter of perfidy. We invite the reader's attention to Prime Minister Churchill's own words. Quote, "I have, as the House knows, hitherto consistently deprecated the formulation of peace aims or war aims, however you put it, by His Majesty's government at this stage, and I deprecate it at this time, when the end of the war is not in sight, and when the conflict sways to and fro with alternating fortunes, and while conditions and associations at the end of the war are unforeseeable. But a joint declaration by Great Britain and the United States of America is an event of a totally different nature. Although the principles in the Declaration have long been familiar to the British and American democracies, the fact that it is a united declaration sets up a milestone or monument which needs only the stroke of victory to become a permanent part of the history of human progress. First, the joint declaration does not try to explain how the principles proclaimed by it are to be applied to each and every case which will have to be dealt with when the war comes to an end. It would not be wise for us at this moment to be drawn into laborious discussion as to how it is to fit all the manifold problems with which we shall be faced after the war. Secondly, the joint declaration does not qualify in any way the various statements of policy which have been made from time to time about development of constitutional government in India, Burma, or any other parts of the British Empire. We are pledged by the Declaration of August 1940 to help India obtain free and equal partnership in the British Commonwealth with ourselves, subject, of course, to fulfillment of obligations arising from our long connection with India and our responsibilities to its creeds, races, and interests. Burma is also covered by our considered policy of establishing Burmese self-government and by measures already in progress. We had in mind primarily restoration of the sovereignty, self-government, and national life of the states and nations of Europe now under the Nazi yoke, and the principles which would govern any alterations in the territorial boundaries of countries which may have to be made." End quote. The last paragraph of Mr. Churchill's statement just quoted poses an ugly question. Are the Europeans by any chance superior to the Asians and Africans as human beings? That Mr. Churchill and his tribe of empire rulers do believe in the superiority of the European to the non-European has long been suspected by all discerning non-Europeans, including Americans. Believing alike in the superiority of the European, Churchill and Hitler differ only in the relative merits of their respective peoples. Hitler claiming for the Germans the role of the Superman race, and Churchill making the same claims for the British. It is fortunate for the human race that these two leaders cannot get together. Otherwise, the world might have groaned under inconceivable tyranny and ruthlessness. Be that as it may, the mischievous implication of point number 3 in Mr. Churchill's thinking should not be overlooked. It is strange President Roosevelt today does not seem fit to repudiate Mr. Churchill's statement that the Atlantic Charter did not apply to India, Burma, and the rest of the British Empire. Caveat emptor. In the fourth point of the Atlantic Charter, promise is held out to all nations of access on equal terms to the trade and to the raw materials of the world, which are needed for their economic prosperity. And as an aside, ladies and gentlemen, that has recently come to pass, if you've been paying attention. I continue. Query: what's all the shooting for if we really cherish this goal as part of the International New Deal? Well, there's a catch in the qualifying phrase. Quote, with due respect for their existing obligations, end quote. We are already given a glimpse in Mr. Churchill's own words of Britain's existing obligations. In India, Burma, and other parts of the British Empire, the lawyers have a phrase. It's called caveat emptor. In the fifth point, stress is laid upon economic collaboration among all nations with a view to securing for all, quote, improved labor standards, economic adjustments, and social security, end quote. Then why fight? The only comment is, amen. Let us hope the noble intent of this point does not become vitiated in the process of translation from paper into practice. In the sixth point, hope is expressed for the establishment of peace and inviolate boundaries for freedom from want and fear, all these to be achieved after the final destruction of the Nazi tyranny. Does this constitute a threat of dire consequences to the German people? The ultimate ends herein visualized are noble, but the spirit of vengeance implicit in the threat of the, quote, final destruction of the Nazi tyranny, end quote, has played into the hands of the Nazis. Whether the majority of the Germans regard Nazism as a tyranny, I do not know. Neither does Mr. Churchill nor Mr. Roosevelt, but the National Socialist rulers of the Third Reich have had little difficulty in impressing upon the German people the need for the last full measure of devotion to their fatherland by holding before them the specter of a Versailles magnified 1,000-fold. German experiences with the last armistice and Versailles Peace Treaty were neither heartening nor reassuring. The blockade was kept up for more than a year after the armistice was signed in 1918, and the peace treaty stood out as a monument to the betrayal of President Wilson's 14 points. It is to be devoutly hoped that at the peace conference this time, the American people, with one voice, shall prevent retribution, vengeance, and hate from dictating the peace. In the seventh point, all men are vouchsafed the right, quote, to traverse the high seas and oceans without hindrance, end quote. Only in Anglo-American bottoms? Let us hope not. In the eighth point, a plea is made. Oh, by the way, folks, bottoms means ships, for those of you who don't understand that last sentence. In the eighth point, a plea is made for the abandonment of the use of force, for the disarmament of aggression-minded nations, for the lightening of the crushing burden of armaments, Why not call a peace conference of leading citizens of all the nations to achieve this end right away? The full text of the 8th point suggests the possibility of Anglo-American policing of the world. And as an aside, that is exactly what is happening. I continue. Now, if the British and the American people want to police the world, I, for one, shall be most happy to pay my share of the cost for the job, which will relieve me of all irksome interferences. But it is essential to note that police powers, to be effective and to function smoothly, must rest upon the consent of the community, explicit or implicit. I and my people may be willing to respect the self-assumed obligations of the Americans and the British to police the world, but are the rest of the peoples of the world ready to accept the situation willingly? Should any nation or group of nations object to Anglo-American policing of the world, brute force would have to be resorted to in order to line them up. And again, that is exactly what is happening. And I continue. In other words, even when we are thinking of disarmament and peace, we expect to rely upon brute force as the final arbiter. This vicious circle can be overcome only if we go about the task of setting up an international police agency, not unilaterally, but by the common consent of all the nations of the world, victor and vanquished alike. And as an aside, that is the very next step. In fact, it's already done on paper. And in fact, we are functioning as the police force for the United Nations. While the world is being scammed into believing that it is the United States' unilateral action, of course it is not. And I continue. Then indeed, and not until then, shall we be in a position to replace brute force with police powers and to create the duly accredited police agency of the United Nations of the world. And that is just around the corner, for we are in stage 3 of the disarmament process as I speak. Ladies and gentlemen, President Roosevelt, by all odds, is the greatest shatterer of precedents and traditions. He was, in fact, a closet socialist and most probably a communist his whole life. He's given us many new terms, phrases, and concepts. His New Deal was a master stroke of genius toward the New World Order. For it took responsible, independent thinking Americans and made them dependent upon the dole. His phrase, United Nations, is his, and America's greatest contribution to the cause of socialism. The United Nations Declaration commits the 26 signatories to complete victory over their enemies and was not restricted to World War II. If you are an enemy of totalitarian world socialist government, you are one of their enemies. It pledges mutual cooperation, economic and military, and bars separate armistice or peace on the part of any of them. The Cold War was a scam, ladies and gentlemen. I've told you that over and over and over again, and every succeeding revelation proves it. Among the signatories to the Declaration, we fail to find any mention of Burma. Burma was more deeply involved in the war than the republics of Central America that signed the Declaration. And those who are not initiated in the mysteries of the empire system need to be reminded that in 1935, the British government in London separated Burma from India for reasons best known to itself. But those who have studied the situation find that it was for the good and sufficient reason that Burma is a land flowing with gas and oil, the modern equivalent of milk and honey. The Prime Minister of Burma at that time, you saw, visited Britain and America, pleading for Burmese self-government. He was turned away, empty-handed, disappointed, while his country was raped. as he bitterly complained to officials in Washington, quote, "The British say they can't give self-government to India because of religious differences. Well, we have no religious problem in Burma. Why not grant self-government to Burma?" End quote. To Mr. Churchill, Burma's importance was only in its mineral wealth and in its famous road to China, not in its 16 million people who were animated by the same hopes and aspirations as were the 40 millions of Great Britain. So much for a country that was destined to play a significant role in the strategy of the Pacific War. The Declaration by United Nations is the most important event of the 20th century. Whether the war lasted a year, 5 years, 10 years, or 5 and 20 years, the historic importance of that document is only growing with the passage of time. Wittingly or unwittingly, and in my studies, I believe fully with full knowledge, participation, understanding, and full wit, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and then his successor, Harry S. Truman, the presidents of the United States of America, laid the foundation of the United Nations of the world, with Washington as the megapolis of the New World Order, concentrating the power of the military might of the United States of America, and with London as the financial center, the empire of money, conceived by poets and statesmen born of the aspirations of the commonality of mankind throughout the ages, meeting in secret behind the lodge door, the United Nations of the world has had a fiery baptism. Will it survive the ordeal by fire? According to those who believe in it and who have brought it about, it goes without saying. The impersonal logic of technology demands that artificial, outmoded barriers between nations be let down and intercourse, cultural and commercial, be permitted to flourish without let or hindrance. And whether or not the world is ready for it, born in lies, deceit, and manipulation, it is now coming into its own. Only for the lack of knowledge of the billions of people in the world who would wish for something other than totalitarian socialism. Most would agree that war is a terrible, terrible thing. And having fought a war, I can tell you that that is absolutely true. There is no glory in war, and there are no heroes. To wish for a peaceful world is sanity. To wish for a totalitarian socialist world is the insurance of the ultimate failure of such a venture. Socialism has never worked, and it never will work. It cannot work. It flies in the face of humanity. They call it democracy, and whenever you hear that word, you know they are talking socialism. The first issue of Veritas will knock you down. Will open your eyes for the first time in your life. You may be able to see. A copy will go to every member of the House of Representatives and the Senate, to the Supreme Court, to the President and Vice President. It will go to every member of CAGI and the Intelligence Service and to all who subscribe. And we have a subscription referral program for those of you who are currently subscribers. It's a good way for you to make some extra money, help educate America, and help increase the circulation of this newspaper, the only one in the world that will tell the truth, that will not tell you what to think, and that will document every single thing it says so that you can duplicate whatever research was done to put it together. Veritas. Veritas means truth, and truth conquers all things. The subscription referral service, ladies and gentlemen. First, you have to be a subscriber at the $50 rate for a one-year subscription. Once you are a subscriber, you may sell subscriptions for $50. You keep 10, send us 40. All checks or money orders made out to Veritas, Veritas. And for every subscription you sell, you have made yourself $10. Now, we've done this so that you can make money and so that you can help spread truth across the world. Once again, there will be a real newspaper. Send your subscriptions to Veritas, Post Office Box 3390. That's P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. That's Veritas, P.O. Box 3390, St. John's, Arizona, 85936. We will continue with this, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow. But first, a word from those who are bringing you world government. Good night, and God bless you all.
It's the dream of friends.